Welcome to the second principle of this free course. Before we jump right into today's principle, let's recall the number one. Did you remember? It was motivation. We talk about the huge importance of motivation. Have you defined yours yet? Okay, this methodology has one cornerstone, one pillar, one strong base, and that is listening. Listening is one of the most powerful, productive, and beneficial things you can do to learn English. Yeah, well, of course, that's obvious, right? We need to listen to the language. But how much English do we really listen? Think about your last English course, maybe in a private school or the courses at your high school or college. There was some listening, right? But then again, how much? In these kind of classes, there's usually an activity in which students listen to an artificial conversation, actors speaking, and then come some activities, exercises. It's all about the structures and the grammar and the vocabulary. Listening activities usually take up a small percentage of the class, 10 minutes or so, and then all the focus is on the grammar and the vocabulary. So there isn't really much listening, right? In many private schools, conversely, the focus is on communication and interaction. Teachers are asked to teach a grammar point, maybe listen to a conversation, give only instructions, and then make students talk to each other. This reinforces on us the idea of learning, because, come on, we're talking, we are using the language in the conversation. But most of the times, we are just repeating ideas, models, patterns of language. We take pre-made sentences and then we fill them out with our information. But we are not really speaking. We are just repeating to fill class time. There's a huge difference between mere communication and real language. So there isn't really much listening, right? We are asked to produce language, but we are not given enough exposition to the language. And exposition to the language is key. Listening is vital. But why? Because it's the natural way in which we acquire language. Think about your native tongue. Before we speak, before we read, before we write, before we do any other thing with the language, the very first thing we learn how to do is listening and understanding. And we do it so much. For years and years we listen to our parents, everybody around us talking, and nobody's teaching us anything. And then one day, without any language classes, we start speaking. Of course, we don't use very complex structures, our vocabulary is limited, but we are talking, we are creating language. This is called the silent period. According to some linguists, this period of silence, of only listening, is necessary to build up the structure of our language. I believe it is, but unfortunately, a big part of the school systems don't. From the very beginning, they force students to talk. They teach them grammar structures, lists of vocabulary. They apply speaking exams. Speaking exams after as little as 2 weeks of classes. They claim that students need practice, and I completely agree, but with one simple, tiny little difference. Speaking is not practicing. Taking exams and doing exercises is not practice. Listening is practice. Our fluency, our pronunciation, our capacity to produce authentic language, to speak, is only a natural consequence of how much we listen. When we listen, we acquire the language, we observe it. It's natural. You see, the brain is such a perfect, well-designed machine that picks up the language and stores all the things we need to use when speaking. On the other hand, when we study it, when we practice it, we learn the rules. But when we speak, we don't need to know the rules. Or do you think about the grammar rules of Spanish just before you speak or when you listen? I'm almost positive you don't. And it's probable that most of us don't even know all the grammar rules of Spanish. But that's not entirely bad, because we can communicate perfectly in Spanish. We do it automatically. And that's what's so great about listening. Listening gives you the ability to speak automatically and correctly. So, if listening is the base of our language acquisition, all I have to do is listen? Can I listen to anything and learn automatically? Well, almost. The things we listen to must have a couple of characteristics. The first thing we need to consider is comprehension. Because, let's be honest, if we start listening to something that we don't understand, we are not gonna make any progress, regardless of how much we do it. It's only sound, noise. We cannot identify the language, and we only observe it when we understand the message. The message, neither the form nor the structure. Anything you decide to listen to is going to help you acquire the language as long as you can understand the message, because that's how this works. Now, Comprehension means that we understand the message, but this doesn't necessarily mean that we have to understand all of it. No, not the 100%. But if you can understand the general idea of what is said, then it'll be good for us. The second characteristic, which is just as important as the first one, is this. The things we listen to have to be interesting. In our regular English classes, most of the times we can understand the conversations that we listen, and that's for a reason. The language used in those conversations is artificial. It's language made specifically for students. And that is a good thing, but only in the beginning. For do you really think we can listen to things like that all the time? All the same worn-out dialogues where people sound just like machines? Hello, my name's John. What's your name? I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. We probably cannot listen to them more than once, because those conversations are usually boring or they don't mean anything to us. We can't connect with them. It is a scientific fact that if the brain is not interested in the message, it will stop paying attention. And then, well, no progress, right? Also, the language used in those conversations, in every single English textbook, is unnatural. People don't speak like that. That's why after months and months of English lessons, we turn on the TV and it all sounds Greek to us, as if it were a completely different language. Before we listen to anything, we can ask ourselves, is this something I would listen to in my native language? Do I have an authentic interest in it? If the answer is yes, then do it. Anything that you are interested in and that you can understand, anything will work. Now, if all we have to do to acquire the language is listening to interesting and comprehensible things, how come we don't do it all the time? Well, there is a big reason for that. When we look for content in a foreign language, things to listen, we find two principal sources, two main providers of listening material: the classroom and the real world. They both have positive and negative aspects. Let's check it out. The classroom provides comprehensible but not interesting material. The real world gives us interesting but not comprehensible content. This is where free talk appears in the picture. I'm going to give you content that is both comprehensible and interesting. Material that you can actually understand, enjoy, and use to learn English. I know that if you look on the internet right now, you will find a lot of people giving out content. Some of them are very experienced teachers. Some others are very enthusiastic people, and I admire what they are doing. I like all the great effort that people are making to help English learners. But with all due respect, I think something is missing. They are usually just translating their classroom classes to a video on YouTube, and that is not enough. My intention is to give you the complete experience, the possibility to learn English, but having a wonderful time in the process. Here's another super positive aspect of using listening to learn. Not only will you learn English in the most effective way, but you can do it anywhere. You don't have to go to a classroom every day at 7 in the morning or after work. You don't have to sacrifice your entire weekends or spending a lot of time driving to go to school. No, you can do it anywhere. When you're riding the bus or driving, when you're at the gym or walking your dog, or when you go grocery shopping, anywhere, anytime, you can learn English in a simple, automatic way. Let's go back to something we discussed on the last episode, about how we acquire our first language. But before we do that, it is important to remark that even though both processes, first and second language acquisition, have similarities, I do not mean to say they are exactly the same. Well, we said that in our first language, it took us maybe 4 years to actually use it. And what did we do in all that time? Did our parents put us together with other kids and said, "Talk about the weather, come on guys," or "That's not the correct tense, you have to say it like this or like that. You are using an adverb instead of an adjective"? No, absolutely not. We only listened. We listened to everything we could. Some of us watch TV series for kids with slow language. Our parents told us, "This is a door, these are cats, the dog barks," etc. And so, by listening a lot, we naturally develop our capacity to speak. That is something that is also true for us, learners of a second language. Let me tell you a little story. When I started secondary school, I had English in the classroom for the first time. All my classmates were having a really hard time, and most of them never really learned the language. I, on the other hand, was having a great time because I was able to understand everything. People used to ask, "How come you know English?" And I really didn't know. It was really strange because I had never studied English. This continued during my entire school years. I never took English classes, I didn't have conversations, I didn't do exercises, but somehow, in the end, I was able to speak English. Good English? Well, I got a job as an English teacher. How did I do it then? I was unconsciously exposed to the language. All the movies, the TV shows, the music, everything I was exposed to in my younger years was in English. Of course, it took me 15 years. But how can you apply the same technique? You just need to listen to a lot of English every day as much as possible. When we do this, we naturally acquire and remember grammar structures, words, expressions, and even pronunciation and intonation, and the words come out naturally when we want to speak. I have put this into practice myself with languages such as French, Italian, Portuguese, and German. And I also apply it with each one of my private students, and believe me, it works like a charm. Look, I am not a polyglot. My other languages are not as good as my Spanish, and of course, this is not something that happens overnight or in 2 weeks, but it's much faster though. And the best part is that it's natural, easy, painless, and fun. How great is that? This is the main difference between the way teachers usually teach English and the way we can learn it better. In a class, any class, the teacher shows you how to use a structure. He gives you some examples, you do some exercises, and that's it. In that moment, of course, you will know it, and you can't remember it. But after a few days, it's likely we'll forget it, because we never see that language again in real life. We never get to hear it again. That is something natural, and that is exactly what we will discuss on the next principle. That'll be it for today's principle. You only need to remember one thing. Listen, listen, listen. I hope you find this information useful, and I hope you will join me for the next principle. See you then.